Hello, my Z followers, and welcome back to the question where you have the questions and I have the answers. I know I haven't posted a long time, but I have been painting my room. You can see the walls used to be orange, now they're like this greenish blue color, and I'm high key vibing with it. Anyway, so also because I'm doing a lot of research on this next topic, which is so fucked. Okay, but also really interesting, and I just gives me an excuse to rant about the American education system some more. Uh, and I've been doing this whole like series about slavery and a lot of things that I missed in my Juneteenth thing, my Juneteenth episode. I'm gonna say episode, it's a video. I'm not special. Uh, this is slavery in relation to the Catholic Church. I guess Catholic Church in relation to slavery. Either way, it's real fucked and real weird. Uh, so, as you know, the story of Christianity, how it came to be, and so on and so forth. And then Catholicism is like a branch off of Christianity. So let's just get some reminders that Christianity started in the Middle East, and just let's look at with geography. There's a map behind me. The Middle East is like right around here, and there's Africa right there. So it's pretty easy to travel from a few, especially since the Middle East also includes that like Egypt area right over here and whatever. And so Christianity was invented then, and then it traveled, like up that way that we know. This is what we're taught, is that it was traveled up into Europe. Christianity traveled up to Europe. But we don't talk about how Christianity traveled every other way. We're only taught white history. And I feel like this is important because I haven't gotten to the Catholic Church. So this is important to point out, is that while we do know it traveled to Europe and then was distributed to the rest of the world this way and this way, we don't know how, if it ever traveled any other direction. And we're taught to believe that Africans didn't have a religion, or they had their own spirits, they had their own like voodoo magic or whatever, which is really racist. I'm not saying it's not true, but I'm saying that if all these like major religions are being invented here, would it not make sense that it could have traveled down to Africa and not just to Europe, or didn't just stay in place? Also, I'm saying this because, as we know, was as we've been taught, not really taught, it's just sort of been like a common knowledge thing that the enslaved people in America were highly religious. At least some of them were, and they, which is why black gospel music is a huge thing. And no one really talks about how they got introduced to the church or into this religion. And so some people theorize that because Christianity was invented sort of in this area, it might have traveled down to Africa, and therefore a lot of Africans already knew about Christianity before being enslaved and brought to America. And this would make a lot of sense because Ethiopia, which never was conquered, one of its main religions is Christianity and Islam and Judaism. And so if they were never colonized, how else would they have learned about it except that it was already there too? I feel like that we don't talk about that enough because we view Judaism and Christianity as a white religion, meaning that it's like a European thing, not really acknowledging that it happened in the Middle East and therefore was there first and very prevalent in these places, and that in comparison, Africa is a lot easier to get to from the Middle East than Europe. And so it would make sense it spread around here as well as being brought to Europe and then to the rest of the world. So that's the start. Anyway, that's just like the background. And that's been a big thing about, oh, well, is it wrong for black people to be Catholic or to be Christian because it's a white person's religion? Well, it's like, really, it wasn't. The white people just sort of took it and popularized it. Catholicism, though, I would think is more of a white religion, if we're going to be using that term, because it is a branch of Christianity and not like the original Christianity. Then again, what actually was the original teachings? What was the intentions? We don't know. We just have modern interpretations. And that's the big thing when it comes to slavery in the Catholic Church, is interpretations and people sort of bending it and interpreting it in the ways that they want. So now we're going to get to actually how Catholicism affected slavery. So as also we know, if you're a history major, that in Europe, around like medieval, like the Dark Ages and onward, the Catholic Church kind of ruled these countries more so than their actual monarchs, and they had a lot more power than any sort of government or monarchy. Because if there were monarchs, they largely listened to the Pope and the Catholic Church. So they had a lot more power than we really give it credit for, and which is why people also sort of question, like, well, did the Catholic Church have the power to prevent slavery? Could they have prevented the slave trade? And that's up to debate, because they did have that power, to say whether slavery was okay in the eyes of God or not. And a lot of the monarchs would have listened, not Henry VIII, but a lot of them who listened and followed and created laws around the Catholic Church would have listened to that. And the issue with the Catholic Church is that they said that slavery was part of Catholicism and that it was a Christian thing to have slaves and masters and have that difference. And how it all started is that there was a part in the Bible that says, all slaves shall listen to their master. And it was written and later interpreted to mean that all like slaves of God, or all mankind, shall listen to their master, which is God and which is like Jesus and whatever. But of course, the popes at the time were like, well, that should be an excuse to enslave people and whatever. Enslave non-Christians was the thing, was that you could enslave people and keep people as property as long as they were non-Christians. So like if you were enslaved and you were baptized, you could no longer be a slave, but you were rather an indentured servant, and they had to free you after a certain period of time. But of course, any children born during that indentured period were then automatically slaves, I guess. It's complicated. And so that was the big thing, was that, oh yeah, you can have slaves and you can enslave other races. And of course, it was mostly Africa because it was the easiest to get to. And then when we got to America, we tried to enslave the natives, but then the natives ended up enslaving Africans as well. And I'll get to that in the next episode, but that's just like a prerequisite. And so that was a big thing. And it was theorized, once again, a lot of Africans already knew teachings, but they just weren't Catholic, but they did understand, like God and all that stuff. And then it became a topic of contention within the popes and the different, factions of the Catholic Church, was that some people were like, no, God says love everybody. We can't enslave these people, just because they're different from us. But then the Pope, of course, of the olden days was like, no, it says here that we can enslave people. And then as the, popes changed hands and so on and so forth, the leader of the Vatican, it was interpreted differently throughout time. And eventually it became, well, if we can enslave these people, but they aren't property. They're just people below us, and it's our job to help them by giving them jobs and housing and stuff. So it was like, you can have slaves, but you can't whip them or punish them because they're people, they're not property. But at the same time, if somebody were to convince your slave to escape or to educate himself and get baptized, then that counts as stealing. So it was like, how can we make it seem that enslavement and slavery is okay in the eyes of God? And that was like the really big deal. And it wasn't until I think like the late 1800s they finally said, well, at least England said slavery wasn't okay. The Pope was still like, well, slavery is imperative to Christianity and is completely within the realms of Christianity because these are non-Christian people and therefore we are better than them. And, we are helping them by giving them purpose in life. That was like the big thing. And it sucks that this is what happened. It's completely awful, completely terrible. And of course now people are going to deny up and down that the Catholic Church had anything to do with it, but they the most power in Europe, and they use that power for so many wrongs, and it's still being used for wrong today. We're still justifying hate crimes and hate speech and prejudices by using Catholicism and Christianity, which is terrible for those like true Christians and Catholics and people who accept others and take Jesus' word and love one another and respect one another. And it's terrible that this is like this sordid history that it has, but it is. And I feel like we are cheating ourselves by not teaching this history. Because I feel like we take all of this slavery and we want to place the blame on someone. And so, of course, we can't blame America because it was England who started the slave trade. So, like, let's blame England. But it was the Catholic Church, because even when England separated and ended slavery, the Catholic Church still okayed it. Now, separate countries could have stopped the policy of slavery. France stopped after the Haitian Revolution. Germany stopped. England stopped because they broke away from the church. But the Catholic Church was still okay with slavery up until like the early 1900s, even when it was mostly outlawed. And I feel like we don't acknowledge that the Catholic Church kind of acted as that autonomous state. Like the Catholic Church was the government, and that is why slavery was so prevalent. And I'm not saying that we should just completely blame it on the Catholic Church and not blame these countries. No, because obviously it was. Yes.
After I get together, we can go for our walk. James does not want to go.
Okay.
So I'm going to transfer his conversation.
That was my mom guest starring because I'm going for a walk later. Yay. But no, so we can't just. It's not a who started slavery, who did this, who did that. It was like a mix. It was like people were gonna find an excuse to enslave others who they thought were below them by any means necessary. Catholicism just was the most prevalent way, and it was the easiest to excuse. And it's disheartening to know that history, but we can't forget it, we can't lie about it, we can't erase it. We need to learn this, and we need to accept that these religions don't have an ethnicity. Something isn't a white religion or an Asian religion. They were more prevalent in these places, but you don't have to be a certain ethnicity to be that religion. And just because a religion did bad things, you shouldn't bash other people for being in that religion. Like, we can't bash Muslims for ISIS. We shouldn't bash Catholics for the slave trade, because people are allowed to grow and things are allowed to change. We shouldn't be trying to keep everything the exact same as it was and being like, well, this is what it said like 1,500 years ago, therefore that's what it means now. No, things are starting to change because people change, societies change. And I feel like that's one of the hardest things in America, is that we can't accept that we need to continue growing and changing. We think that our Constitution, our country, was built perfect, and therefore it continues to be perfect. But it wasn't built perfect. It was built flawed, and it still is flawed. But if we keep working, we can get there, be better. I don't know where that tangent came from, but I hope that made sense. I hope it was informative, and I hope you do your own research, because it's horrific, but it's fascinating, because this is something they don't teach in schools. It's something like one of those like commonly like known things. It's like, oh, a lot of the Africans were very religious when they came to America, as enslaved peoples. But you don't know why, and you think that, oh, they must have learned it from their masters. But it's like a lot of them probably knew these teachings beforehand, and they used it, as a way to sort of hang on to that hope that something could be better and as their way to freedom. So yeah, this was a really long video, and I'm very sorry, but it was really important and it was really fascinating, and I feel like we don't talk about it enough. And I didn't know that. I knew that Catholic Church was very prevalent within the slave trade, but I didn't realize how much and just how complicated it was and how completely shitty it was. That basically it was just years, like hundreds of years, trying to figure out how can we justify slavery within this religion when really you can't. You're just a shitty person who felt like you were superior to another race. And no religion in the world will ever, at its core, mean that. Once you use religion as a way to harm others, you are no longer religious. That is no longer the religion. It's just excuses to be a shitty, evil person. And with that, I'm going to say so long and thanks for all the fish. Thank you so much for making me learn and making me grow, and I hope that you take the time out of your day to research these things, because I'm not a professional. Obviously, I'm not citing sources. I'm just summing up what I've learned, and I hope you do your own research because it is a fascinating subject. It's a lot to read and it's a lot to listen to, but it is totally worth it, I promise you. So long and thanks for all the fish. Be excellent to each other and party on, dudes.